everyone. Welcome to the series Mud Talks, Measuring a Makerspace, How to See a Makerspace in Action with Professor Matthew Spencer. My name is Erin McNabb, Director in the Office of Alumni and Parent Relations and proud member of the class of 2006. We thank you for attending today's event. This talk is being recorded and will be distributed after the event, so please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box and we will try to get through as many questions as possible. Matt will also be having you contribute through the chat feature, so be on the lookout for those prompts. For a brief introduction, the Harvey Mudd Makerspace is 8,000 square feet, student-run facility for providing access to tools, resources, space, and storage to work on personal and academic projects for the 7C students, faculty, and staff. People can work on a variety of projects from electronics to sewing or artistic endeavors. It is located on the first floor of the Scott A. McGregor Computer Science Center and is also connected to the Libra complex just south of the machine and wood shops. So now I'll turn it over to Matt. Thanks for being here. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Erin. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm really excited to have a chance to talk to everyone about the Makerspace. I just assumed the directorship recently, and I am sort of increasingly fascinated by how the place works. But before I get into all of that, I'd like to dive sort of into the deep end with all of you and present a question that I'd like you to answer in chat. So these are scenes from the Makerspace, and even if you don't know what a Makerspace is, you can look at these and get some intuition about them. And I'd like you to answer in chat, what are people here learning? So I'll give us a minute or so to respond to that question. Yeah, so I'm seeing some responses coming in, how to be around people, creatives, collaboration, I love that one, how to solve problems, how things work, absolutely. Learning and learning to express creativity. Yeah, how to physically interact with objects. That's actually an exciting one that I'll talk about in a moment. Initiative also counts, that's true. So this is great. I'm seeing really a good stream of things from you all. I came up with a list of things that I think they're learning, and we're going to compare our lists and see how they line up. So, I mean, the ground level, these people are learning things about welding, about sewing, about professional recording equipment, prototyping, repair, and leadership. And my personal list of things that aren't in the ground level stuff is shown here. These are qualities that I think our Makerspace really uniquely brings to Harvey Mudd, and that are really exciting. So these people are learning about collaboration, which I like that showed up so prominently in you guys' responses. I'm not alone in thinking this. They're learning about how to blend technical and liberal arts. So I think a lot of the responses about creativity line up with that, right? Where it's not just sort of one domain that they're working in, right? They're using these hands-on approaches for pursuits of their own choice. And they're often learning about belonging, right? They're in a community, enjoying themselves. And that's super important for people's experience of learning. Now, if you go to the rest of the Makerspace literature, there's all sorts of other stuff that people think that students learn from Makerspaces as well. There's a lot about self-efficacy or agency, which has to do with, your ability to be the master of your own fate. There's a lot about prototyping and building and a thing called tinkering identity, this sense of working with your hands that I saw in the chat. And Makerspaces and entrepreneurship are very tightly tied in a lot of literature. So that's an exciting avenue as well. So all that's really cool. And I love that I think our students are learning this, and you guys think our students are learning this. But a research question that has bothered me ever since I started publishing in engineering education is, how do we know that they learned it? Which is more subtle than you'd think. So I'm just going to start with my list and poke some holes in how you might measure these concepts. So let's think about 5C collaboration. All right, I could count all of the people from different colleges who use the Makerspace. But what if they're in cliques? What if they don't talk to each other? So being able to suss out those social relationships requires some kind of sophisticated tools. We're talking about blending technical and liberal arts, so fine, I could look up whether people use both 3D printers and sewing machines, because those are maybe from two different like traditions of training. But that doesn't tell us whether they think about 3D printing in an artistic way or sewing in a technical way. And for community and belonging, right, that's actually a very subtle question, right? There's nothing I can count that will tell me if someone feels like they're in a community, so I have to ask them. And if I ask them, I have to either come up with a very sophisticated survey question or an interview that makes them feel comfortable enough to talk to me. And then finally, right, who is receiving these benefits is a really interesting question. Like, what are the people who come to the makerspace, and do they all experience these things in the same way? Like, is an average going to reveal their experiences? So these are questions that I find super interesting and that we're going to talk through a little bit today as we go through the presentation. Our overall sort of plan is that we're going to start at the ground floor, just in case people are new to makerspaces. I'm going to introduce makerspaces in general and Mudd's makerspace in particular. We're going to talk about some data that's just started coming out of our makerspace as a result of some research efforts, and where I'd like to go in the future, like other stuff I'd like to learn about the makerspace. And then finally, we're going to talk about exciting directions that I really hope the makerspace goes, because these places are such engines for like creativity and excitement that I hope we can realize. All right, so we're starting with what are makerspaces? And the question that we can pose is, what makes a makerspace? Like, what is like the fundamental definition of it? And I'd invite you to throw a couple of answers in the chat. And as you write your answer, consider if it would also apply to a machine shop or to a laboratory. So I'll give us like 30 seconds for this one. So my sort of basic definition is, right, you start with a space, and you have people make stuff, and these are actual products that have been produced at our makerspace, which are all quite cool. Students can make a lot of different interesting things. And they make stuff with tools, so the makerspace has to provide access to tools and materials. But the secret sauce, as the chat has already come to, is that makerspaces are unique because of their community. They are these really interesting communities of practice where people can feel invited into participating and can learn from their peers. So I love this definition. This comes from literature. The citations, at the bottom of the quote here. But makerspaces are places of innovation, creativity, and exploring curiosity through hands-on learning experiences. While 3D printers, laser cutters, and other computer-aided design tools housed in a makerspace are not different from that of the equipment one would find in a typical machine shop, the culture and interactions unique to makerspaces transcend traditional stigmas. That's great. That's what I'm after. So we're trying to make a community of practice that provides access to interesting tools and materials so people can make stuff under their own agency. All right, so to do that, we need to start with a space. This is a floor plan for Harvey Mudd's Makerspace. And it's obviously doesn't tell the whole story, so we're going to be zooming in on different parts of it. The first I want to look at is the geography. So Mudd's Makerspace is right across the street from our machine shop. We have super close relationships with the shop because it helps people make stuff, and it's a great partnership. If you head out to the east, and by across the street, by the way, I mean across a 6-foot hallway, not like an actual road with cars. Sorry, that was a turn of phrase there. If you go out to the east, you hit our patio, which doubles as this cool loading unloading dock and outdoor space for well-ventilated equipment. Gets a lot of use. And if you go out our southernmost door, you hit scripts immediately, which is a fact I want you to file away. We're going to come right back to that. So this is a line of sight on our makerspace. So the blue cone indicates like where the camera's pointing, and it shows you sort of the interior of it. So we have this big open space with work tables and free supplies. If you look at the back of the space, you can see that we have this loom set up there. That's a really cool piece of equipment that's getting a lot of demand. And on the right side of the picture, you can see a checkout computer. So that's what staff use to check equipment out to users. And I also want you to file away that we have checkout information that will become pertinent later. If we take a slightly different angle, we're now looking into our 3D printer and laser cutter room. So this is where a lot of the high-tech toys live. We have 3D printers, we have laser cutters, we have water jets. The 3D printers have all sorts of capabilities. We can do deposition molding, we can do stereolithography, and more. So it's a cool facility. Students love it, get a ton of use out of it. This view is of our lounge. So it's often the first space that students hit when they enter the Makerspace through kind of its main exterior door, or if they come down the flight of stairs that's just out of frame to the right. And this is more important than you'd think. A lot of the research on Makerspace shows that having a space for students to convene and hang out is crucial to cultivating this sense of community. And we have a great lounge. This is like, the photographer nailed the golden hour. This is a good space to hang out. And it gets used all the time. We have a lot of students who spend a lot of time there. And finally, I want to call out one of our special facilities. This is something that you don't see in every Makerspace. This is our recording studio. So we have a sound booth and then a black box theater that people can participate in. And students use this to produce all kinds of interesting media productions. Also pictured here is the back of our Makerspace manager's head. This is Kim Neal, and she's a tremendous asset to Makerspace, A, because she's a wonderful Makerspace manager, and B, because she has audio engineering experience. And so has really made sure this space works well, to the point that it's been called one of the best recording studios on the consortium. So it's really a gem, and our students love it. So that's cool. That's our physical space. But a lot of this also depends on how the space works. And one of the leading points is that our space is student run. So pictured here is 5 out of our 6 head stewards. The 6th is presumably behind the camera. And they really have a tremendous amount of authority in running the Makerspace, like to the point that I defer to their decisions on almost all things inside of the space, which really helps the space be by students and for students, and also helps students really own the space. So this leadership team helps run our team of student workers who are called stewards. And the stewards then in turn help train our users. So the students manage tool access and training. The training you can kind of see displayed by these pins on the aprons that they're wearing. Stewards own those when they demonstrate proficiency on different parts of the Makerspace, like different tools they can become experts on. And that's a useful visual cue to users about where they can ask for help. The picture on the right, in addition to showing a bunch of our stewards doing work, is inside of our cage. So that's where we keep equipment that we check out to students. And so I just wanted to point out that stewards manage that. You can see another checkout computer on the right and some equipment on the shelf behind them. So in addition, stewards train students in how to use tools. And they do this through a program called workshops. So on the left, we see a workshop where a steward in an apron is training users in how to use our laser cutter. On the right, we see a steward who is planning to run a workshop on felting. And one of the cool things about these workshops is students tend to get like a physical artifact. So this little shoulder creature is the output of a workshop. So that's roughly how the stewards kind of interact and train users, but you don't need to find someone just to get basic training. Like if you just want safety and to kind of get started on stuff, the stewards have built this beautiful website where you can take a quiz to certify yourself as safe to use a piece of equipment. So this is available all the time, and it's also available to all of the MUD community, so current students, faculty, and staff. So, a first-year student on their first day can take the general safety quiz and come to the Makerspace in order to get started using hand tools. And by the way, put a pin in the fact that we have this quiz information. That's going to come up later too. All right. In addition, stewards really work around the clock. We staff this place from 1 p.m. to 10 p.m. In order to 7 days a week, in order for students to have really wide access to the space. And finally, I want to call out that the head stewards have really done an excellent job of kind of setting the tenor of a welcoming community of practice. This is another excerpt from the website that they built, and you can see that we're looking at the values webpage, where they're really thoughtful about making the space student-run, a safe place to experiment, a welcoming environment, accessible, focused on community, focused on nurturing curiosity, and constantly improving. Like, these are just great principles for running a space, and I'm proud of their work. All right, so that's kind of the basics of how the Makerspace operates. With sort of that understanding of kind of the rules of the road, I want to look at some data that we've been able to pull out or infer from Makerspace resources about how the Makerspace is being used. And our method here is all counting data from users. So we've looked at checkouts from the checkout computer I pointed out earlier, and quiz taking rates and pass rates from the quiz webpage I put out earlier, and then did something very clever where we can sort of identify what equipment people are using based on what they check out. For instance, if you check out a welding mask, you're probably using the welding station. And so we rely on that inference to figure out a lot of tool use. And I'm talking about these methods with a we, and that's because my research student has really been instrumental in this. I'm working with a student named Gregory Wickham, and he's doing a great job sort of helping us to start thinking about how to analyze the Makerspace. All right, so off the top, we have 1,260 users, and about half of them are not from MUD, which I think is really a cool headline. There's a bunch of sort of funny wrinkles in this data, though. You'll notice that our largest user base is from MUD, our second largest place is from Scripps. And then Pitzer and Pomona are sort of tied for third place, and Claremont McKenna is the fourth. And if you graphed that versus distance from the Makerspace, it would track exactly. So, one thing that you can infer from this data right away that's not obvious is that proximity to the Makerspace really matters. And so I think the architecture of the McGregor building is just wonderful for us by expressly inviting in the other campuses with that south-facing door. I also want to call out a little bit of context on the total proportion of users that we represent. This 606 MUD students is almost 3/4 of the MUD population. And these 1,260 users are 15% of all 5C students. So really, we have super wide adoption across the campus. And I think that's a testament to how this training has worked in our first couple of years of operation. So another fun one is to look at the total number of actions each user sort of takes inside of the Makerspace. So this is checking out a piece of equipment or logging into a piece of equipment that requires a login. Just things that we let us know that a person was there. And what we find is that not too surprising, there's a lot of sort of casual users and a long tail of power users. So, the third quartile here, 10 interactions, that's enough to do a project or two. You can check out something and work for a couple of days. And then the people who have 40 and 50 interactions are just there all the time. They live in the makerspace. So we have about 250 of those power users with 10 or more interactions, which again is a solid, fifth of our users. And that's, I think, a huge engagement number, really great. We can also sort of see this power user disparity in the number of quizzes people tend to pass. There are a lot of folks who take one or two quizzes, get into the makerspace and learn how to use a 3D printer. And then we get this second bump out around 6 and 7 quizzes, which are people who are like, oh, I'm going to learn everything here. So if we ask what kind of tools people check out, or like what sort of activities people are up to, the answer is mostly sewing, using hand tools, and 3D printing. Those are sort of our kind of top demand. So you can see this diagram sorted by number of unique users using a tool on the left. And there are a couple of duplicates on there, but that's a filtering thing that we're working on. Then on the right, you can see the density of 3D printing. And, we'll get 60 or more prints per week. So we're, pushing through hundreds of prints per month, which supports classroom activities, individual interests, all sorts of projects. You can also see this in the quiz rates too. Our top 2 quizzes are the general safety quiz and the 3D printer and laser cutter quiz. All right, so that's some interesting information, some kind of basics about the space, but I want to talk a little bit about other things that we hope to learn. And to start with that, I want to first call out this slide. There are a ton of things that we could learn. I've listed my big questions above and trying to interrogate how each of those work is an ongoing project for me. But I've highlighted belongingness because I think that's a great place to start and maybe the hardest to measure. The numbers on the previous slide didn't say anything about it. There's also a lot of other fun stuff to look at. I don't know, I haven't seen in other makerspace literature people distinguishing between power users and normal users. So I'm curious what motivates people to really spend a lot of time in the makerspace. There's also a bunch of interesting techniques about how students move from tool to tool or spread themselves across the space that can examine whether or not they're blending technical and liberal arts. And some really neat techniques emerging to look at those. So I've highlighted that one so we can look at it. And finally, all of these techniques I've looked at so far are pretty quantitative, but talking to students goes a long way. Like they'll tell you interesting truths. So coming up with like a systematic way to interview students is also really interesting too. But so let's talk about this student tool use thing. So I want to point out first, these figures aren't mine. I'm reproducing them from a paper that came out of Georgia Tech and Texas A&M. You can see the paper reference down in the lower left. But these authors have developed this kind of neat method of representing student interactions with the makerspace using graph theory. And then looking at kind of network density in those graphs to see the distribution of students across tools. And so I just want to call your attention to the plot on the right where they have men and women students highlighted on sort of the top 2 rows, because this particular figure that I borrowed is about a breakdown according to gender. And they've separated out students' interactions with different tools using this network structure on the right. And you can see that there are a bunch of tools that men and women agree on, highlighted in light blue at the top, and then some that only men use, highlighted in dark blue in the middle. And that's a neat finding about their makerspace. So I think we actually have the data to do this in our Makerspace now. We just haven't run the analysis yet. So we're really looking forward to starting to apply these techniques. I also want to talk about belongingness, which we're largely trying to get at with thoughtful surveys. So, the first thing that you got to think about whenever you're trying to measure a psychological construct is really pinning it down. Because, I've been talking about belongingness through this whole presentation, and I'd hazard that most of you thought, yeah, I bet I could feel like I fit in a space. That seems like a good thing to measure. But you got to be really careful because, the right follow-up is actually, yeah, belongingness to what? Because am I asking if students feel like they belong at a school or in the makerspace or to some major, where the major could be conflated with ideas of identity, right? Asking if I belong in the engineering major is different than am I an engineer? And all of these are separate psychological constructs that require different questions to answer. So you dig around in literature, you find tools that other people have put together to really suss out these differences, and you come up with a survey that has some really thoughtful questions. For instance, I socialize with people I have met in the makerspace, targets makerspace belonging. Or people at this school are friendly to me, targets institutional belonging. And those, at first brush, sound like very similar questions, but are really quite different. So I just want to emphasize, I guess, that the construction of these surveys is a real art. And also, I definitely stand on the shoulders of educational psychologists. They do spectacular work. All right, so then next question, though, is how do we tell if the Makerspace is doing something? All right, so maybe we can survey Makerspace users versus Makerspace non-users and see if there's a difference. But how do you know that it isn't that people who feel higher belonging use the Makerspace, right? How do you tell that the Makerspace is doing something? So just having a control and a survey population won't do it for you. You also need to observe their changes in time. So our full plan is to run a longitudinal study where we survey students multiple times over years to see if their sense of belonging changes if they spend more time in the makerspace. Right, and so constructing that set of surveys and the plan for distributing that information is some work. Again, all credit to Gregory for sort of conceiving of the study and getting this put together. So with those bits of analysis that I'm excited about doing sort of squared away, I also want to point not just towards my future plans, but towards the Makerspace's future plans, because I think there are so many really cool things that the space currently is, and so much untapped potential. This space could be even better for our students than it is, and I'm excited to share with you why. So, I want to start by reiterating, we do provably great stuff, right? We've been talking about how we can show that we are doing good stuff. We have this thriving community of users from across the 5 Cs. We provide these free materials and training that students use to make all sorts of stuff. They exercise their agency. It's student run. We get community and ownership. And we're studying belonging and pathways through the space. Great. And one interesting bit about that has enabled all of this is that we're philanthropically funded. So we have tried to forgive my photography. I'm not much of a picture taker, but I was trying to get plaques honoring donors and the thing they honored in the same frame. So if you look at the upper right, that's the honoring the kitchenette, and you can see we have a kitchenette. Good. The upper left, that's a plaque about the water jet, which was provided by a donor. And the very corner of a water jet, I did not nail that angle. And then finally, on the bottom, you can see a plaque honoring the Jeff Groves Stink Be Gone room, which was given by a donor with a sense of humor, and a little bit of picture of our composite layup table. So this philanthropy really helps us in a lot of ways. One, it lets us be sort of transparent to users, right? They can take stuff and use stuff without worrying about the cost of it, which really lowers barriers to entry. Two, it helps us partner with like these great enthusiastic people who love the idea of the makerspace for whatever reason, because they love collaboration, because they love the blend of technical and liberal arts. Lots of good stuff that draw people in. But I want to call out, I just came back from a Makerspace conference and I saw awesome stuff other Makerspaces are doing. So I'm talking about two other Makerspaces on this slide as a way to spark your imagination about things that our Makerspace could enable. So on the left, we see this picture that says Rethink the Rink, which is a program that's run out of Carnegie Mellon's Makerspace, in which the Makerspace partners with the Pittsburgh Penguins and has students over a 1-week window during spring break build a product for them. And some of these products have been successful. So this panel that has the sticker on the back of it is a crash pad on the side of the rink that directly came out of a Makerspace into the community and is being used by players, with verifiable results. On the right, this is a headline from a Harvard News article announcing the Marine Debris Fashion Show, which is this cool fusion of fashion, right, artistic expression, tricky engineering, working with these insane plastics that are found in the ocean, and a sustainability mission, right? This show is intended to raise awareness about the presence of marine debris. So Makerspaces can be these hubs that really fuel entrepreneurship and sustainability and social impact. And I am so excited to help ours do that. Right now, our only really gate is hours in the day, which is actually an awesome place to be. We already have a good community, space full of tools that work well. We just need person hours to enact these ideas, and I am so excited to launch them. So if you like that vision, there are things you can do. You can spread the word about a Makerspace, say, oh, Harvey Mudd has a cool place. You can come and take a tour. We love showing people around. If you're an industry that is relevant to the Makerspace, especially if you know a lot about 3D printers, come talk to us. We love industrial and vendor partnerships. And then we are just launching a Makerspace newsletter. So I have a place on this slide that you can sign up. And I think the link will get put into the chat in a second. So if you want to hear from us intermittently with lots of cool projects and student pictures and stuff, sign on up. So, this is all stuff that I care about deeply. And I hope what I've shown is that Makerspaces are these vibrant communities of practice, and you don't have to take my word for it. There are things we can do to try to understand exactly what students are getting out of a Makerspace, help them get more and carry it out into the world. So with that said, we're excited for you to hear more information from us, and I'm also excited to take your questions.
Thank you so much, Matt. I've got a few questions in the Q&A. Everyone, please put your questions in the Q&A. We had a lot going on in the chat, so it helps me make sure I haven't lost anything if you use the Q&A function. I will ask a pre-submitted question first. So how often do people enter a Makerspace for one particular hobby or interest and then branch out and utilize other resources in the Makerspace? Do you have any idea of how often that might happen?
Yeah, so that's where a lot of where this network analysis is going to go. So I don't have data to support that yet. I do have a lot of anecdotes.
Great, they asked for stories, Matt. You can go for a story.
Because we see people come in all the time, especially on sewing machines. Harvey Mudd has a giant sewing club that uses this place all the time. And from there, you can see the 3D printing room through the back wall. If you look at the lower left picture here, right, that's people sewing on the left, 3D printing room on the right. So you're being invited in. So people will come in one of these clubs stick around, become a steward, master everything, go on to teach other people, right? There are an assortment of names I can drop. If you just go look at our list of head stewards, they're prime examples, right? They're people who have really invested in the space and really learned a lot from it.
Yeah, and I think most people start with one thing and then branch, right? That seems pretty logical for that.
Yeah, and it's so visible in the space.
Right.
Again, I think the architecture here is just wonderful. You can see what other people are doing and interact with them really easily.
Great. So we got a question about, are there any other maker spaces on any of the other campuses, or are there any other plans? You showed data that shows like distance kind of matters for the accessibility to the makerspace. And I know of the Hive, but that's not exactly a makerspace.
So the Hive is where I was going to go to answer this question. So there may be student clubs or organizations on other campuses. I don't have eyes all the way into every student activity. And another tricky thing here is how you define a makerspace. I think a lot of people who made the first makerspaces, like first academic makerspaces, like a decade ago, right? This is still a pretty new idea. Initially struggled just to find all the places on campus where there was fabrication equipment. And they included often labs and machine shops and other types of spaces because this designation, didn't exist yet. But the big one, the 5 Cs, is the Hive, which is this Center for Design Thinking. And their, main goal is to get people to think expansively about solutions to problems, which is what the discipline of design thinking is about. And it's a really cool and systematic technique. It lets you rigorously approach any problem and try to come up with know where to spend your time, a meaningful solution. So that's at their heart, to my understanding. But part of design thinking is prototyping, and they have facilities that let people do light prototyping, getting like a first idea out. But often that idea won't be necessarily a working one in the way that a first engineered idea would be. So our makerspace has substantially heavier prototyping capabilities. The 3D printers, the water jets, the laser cutters, the electronics bench, all enable people to take a first idea and build a first realization of it. And as a consequence, I think we work really well together. I think the Hive and the Makerspace are great partners in what we're trying to do, right? They want people to understand what to make and how to get started. And we want people to be able to make what's in their heart, to make something interesting.
Great. And the Hive is located on the north side
in the
of
middle,
Pomona.
in the library.
Right.
Yeah.
We got a question about, how are the tools and materials and other resources shared between the machine shop, the makerspace, and like the labs and lab-like facilities?
So materials is kind of easy to answer. Almost all of these spaces have stock that's just available to students, often at no cost. I think, and I'm not an expert on all of them, but and I know there's recharge for some machines. In our space, we recharge for our most expensive 3D printer. I think at the shop, sometimes you have to bring your stock, sometimes you can work with scrap. It depends on what you're making and what the situation is. But materials in general, we're not, it's a pretty open door. Students can find stuff to build their first prototype. We did have one kind of silly example where a student was building his 50th prototype that was going for sale, and we had to make a policy about tragedy of the commons. You can't take all our stuff and sell it. But in general, materials very free flowing. Tools are trickier. So often those have to stay in one space because the space needs guaranteed access to the tools in order to fulfill its mission. So, the makerspace has a check-in, check-out policy, and you're responsible, like a library, for bringing your tool back. I think both the engineering labs and the shops tend to have the tools much more stationary. They live there.
Yeah, I mean, some of their tools physically cannot leave the building, so I think that also helps with that. But people can take them back to their dorms, right? Like a makerspace item, take it back to
Yeah, I
their
mean, I
dorms and
think when
bring
you
it
have it
back.
checked out, you can work with it where you're going to work with it,
Okay.
as long as it comes back.
Right. Someone is asking, how are stewards compensated? Do they commit hours? Is there like min
Yeah, so
hour month?
hourly, we pay
And
them.
then,
And are mindful about their total engagement with Mudd. We have some federal work study students who are able to be stewards, which is, I think, great. I think this is a great federal work study kind of job.
do you lose people during like finals and heavy like impact times?
So the head stewards and the steward team are really thoughtful about that. They actually tend to really double down during kind of finals because it's a project period and students are often up against deadlines to get a thing built. So they're deeply committed to being there for their users. But yeah, absolutely. Like during spring break, we close, right? Everyone's gone.
Right. Right. I was asking, will you study the differences in tool use based off of which college they attend? So
yeah, I think that's actually something that's really fascinating about our makerspace, and another angle that I would like to study. Can't talk about every idea that's crossed my mind, unfortunately. I have a finite time here. But the fact that we have multiple colleges coming together here is very different than most makerspaces, like the consortial aspect. And the baked in like social grouping is kind of unique. And seeing whether or not the makerspace is an agent for ameliorating that, either through shared tool use or shared project participation, is really interesting. That's top of mind for especially like that 5C collaboration bullet.
would you also maybe include data based off of the student versus faculty, right? It's technically open to faculty and staff.
Yeah, almost all our users are students. Turns out faculty and staff both have jobs, but
okay, yeah, so true.
we can pull some data about like classes that use the makerspace,
so
which
a little
is
bit age related, a little kind of.
Yeah. Which is kind of like an evolving idea. More and more classes are getting interested in using the space. But we also have to share it very thoughtfully with current users who, right, don't want to be scared off by someone lecturing about differential equations in front of the room, right?
Right.
So that's an evolving policy, but we're excited that there's more interest there, and seeing how that breaks down across schools is something that we look forward to. Most of our class users right now, though, are sort of fiber arts courses, many of whom are non-5C.
Right. And when you go to like the school level, would you think you could also go to like the major level? I mean, some people
Yeah, I mean,
declare.
sure. Look, a lot of things to measure, right?
Right.
So absolutely, I think that's a thing to interrogate.
Okay. And then someone noted there wasn't any data about the recording studio specifically. So have you guys collected use data on that space?
It's harder to collect use data on it because we don't record student swipes. So even though it's like behind a locked door that you swipe into, that's captured by a separate system, and rightly so, right? I shouldn't see where my student swipes into all the time, right? That'd be weird.
Would be weird.
So we don't have like a clean login trail on the recording studio. So we're working on it. We'll come up with something.
Very cool. Someone is asking, can alumni use the makerspace? Is it open to alums?
We love to give alumni tours. Right now, we can't have like alumni standing users because it's hard for us to track the safety information about them.
Right.
But talk to us. If you want to hang out, well, we can see what we can arrange.
Great. Have you guys done any events where people can demonstrate their creations that they've made in your makerspace?
Yeah, so we have a student projects fund where students can apply for money for materials that aren't in our space and build stuff up. And so we have like this archive of project reports that we share out in various formats occasionally. But having like a projects day is not something I've seen during my tenure. Bear in mind, I started over the summer, so I wasn't the first person here. And something that would be awesome. I think people show off a lot at parent weekend alumni events. Like they're always showing, there's always stuff that has been made and active demos going on during these events. But we don't, I don't think, have a specific day honoring stuff that people have made. And
But maybe we should.
Yet another thing to get to, like a lot of good stuff to do.
Absolutely. I think that would be fun. Someone is asking, does the Makerspace support integrated design and analysis methods such as generative design?
So we don't specifically teach design methods here. You can pick that up in sort of our intro engineering course, and you can pick that up at the Hive. But we wouldn't stand in the way of an integrated design analysis. Like so I'm going to confess, I don't know all the vocabulary words there. Like generative design is new to me. But if I'm reading between the lines, it sounds like there's maybe some prototyping in the loop, and we love people to try stuff and see if it works. That's very high on our list, and we encourage people to use it.
Very fun. And going back to another pre-submitted question, do you think, so the Makerspace has been open 4 years now, I think?
This is our 3rd year of operation.
3rd year. Do you think student interest in general has increased over those years? And how are you guys making sure students are engaged with hands-on problem solving?
Yeah, increased like a rocket ship.
Like a rocket ship.
We have a huge user base, and students just come and spend time there. It's a good space for homework, for hanging out, and for building stuff, and often seamlessly switching between them. So in terms of like ensuring that people are engaged with hands-on stuff, we have to like fend them off with a stick. Yeah, it's like most students desperately want to build things, as do other 5C students in our experience. And so you can see from our like print statistics that we're running all the time. Our barrier is hours staying open and keeping equipment running, not interest, as near as we can tell. If we offered more, people would take more.
Yeah, that's how it seems. Yeah, for sure. Oh, we had a clarification on the alum question. If you were a current student and took all your safety stuff and graduated, could you then use the Makerspace after you finished your 4 years?
Same rules. We lose records on you. So
gosh darn it, we tried. That's understandable though. Safety first. So can you talk a little bit about,
talk to us, like we can see what we can do.
Right. You may know some people still on campus that might help you. So talk to us a little bit about how classes use this space, and how classes use it for classwork specifically.
Yeah, so the head stewards, I think very thoughtfully, didn't want this to kind of be reservable as a classroom, because that boxes out current users. But we definitely want classes to come in and learn how to use the equipment. It's a great way to spread training around. It's a great way to recruit users, and it's a great resource for the classes, adding hands-on components, something that's near and dear to my heart. So we have a couple of use cases. Maybe the most interesting one is being run out of computer science right now by Professor Julie Madero, which is blending this kind of like analysis of sort of the control algorithms and data representations used in the Makerspace with the act of making stuff. And so you'll go generate something to make in class time, and then you come in and you get a demo on a piece of equipment, and your assignment might be to build something using that equipment, demonstrating whatever algorithmic principle was underlying the lesson in the first place. And you can find examples of these algorithmic principles all over. So certainly, right, you're 3D printing, there is a file format that represents what you're printing, and you can try constructing that file, in a variety of ways, not using the software. But if you look at weaving, which we have a ton of facilities for, we have the loom that I pointed out and a whole second loom that hides behind it. which is in fact automated. It's a digital loom, so you can upload images to it and it'll help you weave them. Weaving has this deep algorithmic root with how the threads have to interact with one another. Like there's a math problem you can define about that, that I know is featured in the class.
Very cool. Yeah, I appreciate that it's not reservable. I feel like it'd be reserved all the time if you could actually reserve the makerspace, which would almost make it unusable. So someone is asking about how the Hive skill shares are different from the Makerspace workshops. So I had to look up what Hive skill shares are, but it looks like they have woodworking skill shares, printmaking skill share, sewing. So maybe a few overlaps, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're very similar things. I guess, and we definitely drew inspiration from the Hive as we sort of came up with our programming. I do think that these are student-led and student-conceived is a little different. They aren't strictly about skills all the time. Often they're about an end art product. And that comes from our steward team. It's this huge pool of creative energy that helps make these really interesting training, recruitment, art co-events that are very interesting. So it's not strictly regimented to like being about woodworking. It'll vary year to year. And I also don't want to knock the Hive there. Their skill shares might have similar underpinnings, but that's a thing that I like about ours.
Yeah, and I don't think it would be the worst if there was overlap, right? That one's closer to certain students and ours is closer to others. So I think that's okay. I think this is an important question near the end. Are there any tools, machinery that you'd like to have in your makerspace? And is there any space to expand in the future?
We have some room to maneuver, and we could absorb some equipment. We're working on sort of a donation evaluation process where we can figure out if we can support a machine effectively. And we're working through that with a potential donation of a wet belt sander right now, which would be a cool thing if it makes sense and if we can support it. If you're talking specifically about tools that we want, I see a future where we expand our 3D printing capability quite a bit. Right now, the farm is already at capacity and with a backlog. So we could double our number of 3D printers and I think still have them in meaningful use. But more important than tools right now, I've emphasized a couple of times, we're limited by hours. What we really need is the ability to hire more students and possibly more staff. So if you're donation minded, I think that's the thing that would be most interesting. And we've just started a program where you can kind of sponsor a steward. We have one of our head stewards sponsored by a really generous donor for sort of a named seat. And that's hugely helpful to us. I think really interesting to the donor because they get this relationship. And so plenty of tools we can come up with,
right.
3D printing top of mind, but what we really need is people, it's person power that's going to take us to the next level.
Right. And there's even like summer stewards, so it's not like a full school year for like the summer learning program.
Yeah, we have a summer program that we also pay students for.
Right. There's a couple ways to support students working in the area, which is pretty great. Someone else is asking about how do you guys accommodate people with various disabilities, right? Hearing impaired, vision impaired, are those things you guys consider?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you can check out the Make website. It has an accessibility section. And I think one of the interesting things is that we also have wide range of ability represented, not just in our user base and not just in our steward team, but in our leadership team. And so having this represented in leadership, which is something that students think about, is crucial to having this trickle down into all of the space design, which goes into signage, which goes into how the website works. Lots of details about how to make the space welcoming to everyone.
Perfect. I just shared the website to the Makerspace, which has some fun little projects on it, which is pretty exciting. All right, we're just about out of time. Any final thoughts, Matt, that you wanted to share with our group?
I'm so glad you took the time to come and listen. This is a really cool space, and I hope that came through to you.
Yeah, thanks. I really enjoyed the thought process of what Makerspaces are for and what they can do for us. I enjoyed the participation from the audience. We got a space to learn new skills and not be afraid to fail, which I think is really exciting for learning new skills. Oh, is there going to be a tour of the Makerspace during Parents Weekend?
Absolutely.
You know there will be.
If there were not. Yeah.
It might not be a tour. It might be even more fun, like an
It could be like a workshop-y
activity.
thing. We'll see.
We'll see what we can do, both for Family Weekend and Alumni Weekend as well. So if you guys are coming to town for those two, look out. So I want to thank you, Matt, for joining us today and sharing your knowledge and insights with us. Thank you to our audience for your questions and for attending this event and participating in our chat. It was fantastic. We'll follow up within the next week with a recorded video and any presentation materials Matt wants to share with you guys. This will actually be our last Mud Talk of the calendar year, but if you're interested in being a Mud Talk speaker, contact us at alumni@hmc.edu. We will have another alumni virtual hangout event on December 14th to celebrate our Founders Day. And then also our new president, Harriet Nebhard, has 3 more community events, one on Thursday in Los Angeles and 2 this December, one in New York City and one in Washington, D.C. So if you're in those areas, make sure to look out for those events. And then, of course, don't forget to save the date for our inauguration celebration, February 29th and March 1st. So all future events can be found on our website, alumni.hmc.edu. Hope you all have a great night, and we will see you next time.